Hello everyone and welcome to .NET Core Central. In today's video, I am going to talk about model validation. So in most cases, when we deal with a web application or web application essentially calling web API behind the scene, it'll call the endpoints necessary for accessing data. Now those data can be coming as a post or get. And in both cases, it is important that we do some sort of validation. And those validation can be done a number of ways, but one of the way and the easiest way to do is through attributes provided out of box by the framework, and then using a model state, which is also available part of every controller. So to demonstrate that, what I have is I have a user controller which has a get and a post method. The get method is a simple method which takes a name, and our goal will be to validate this name parameter. Similarly, post method takes an user object, and our objective will be validate the user object. To validate the user object, what we are going to do is we are going to use attributes which are part of system.componentModel.data annotations, and that is what we are going to use to validate. So here what we can do is we can start with the name and say name is a required attribute. So we will provide required as an attribute, and I will add the namespace here system.componentModel.data annotation. Similarly, for age, for example, we want the age to be between 0 and 99. So we can add a range attribute here, and we can say minimum value is 0 and maximum value is 99. Similarly, for date, we can have an attribute, and I'll come to that later. And for email, what we can do is we can have for email, we can say, hey, email is an email address. So we can use the email address attribute for that. Similarly, for phone, we can have an attribute called phone, which will ensure that it is a phone number or a number as such. And for address, let's say we want to use the address should be required, but it can be an empty string also. So for that, what we can do is we can use allow empty string is equal to true. So in that case, you have to pass an address, but you can pass it as an empty string. You cannot omit the object from the JSON. So here, as you can see, in this example itself, we see the option of a required, which means it has to be always passed. Range, where we can validate a range for an integer or double value. Then we have an email address, which we can validate through email address. We have a phone number, which we can validate through phone number attribute. And then we have an address, which is also required, but we are going to allow an empty string for this. And membership and date something, which I'm going to come back and show two other different ways of validation. When we come to that, I'm going to take these two into account. So now let's run this application. And if we run this application, we are going to use multiple option in the post, because if you remember, the post takes the user object. So during post, we can have multiple ways validate the whole process. So the UI is up, and now we can click on the post. And here, if we want to try out, see how everything is already coming in the format because we defined those attributes. Now, if we run this, phone number is a string. It is not in a number format. So if I execute this, we're going to get the error that phone number field is invalid. So here, if I provide any number, it is going to work fine. And if I execute now, we get 200 back. Now let's change this to 101. Now we are going to get an error for the age, and you can see the field age should be between 0 and 99. Let's put it back to 99. And if we change the email here, just get rid of this and execute, the email is going to throw an error. So as you can see, there are multiple ways we can validate an object just using attributes which we have defined, and that is about it. It's just the attribute defined in the model allows us to validate all the things in the model. Now the other thing we can do is, if we go back to this, for a string parameter, for example this name, we can also have something called string length, where we can define what should be the maximum length. So for name, let's say we want the maximum length to be 10. And then we can also provide things like specific error message here. So I can give error message and I can say name is too big. So now let's run this application again. And this time for the name property, if we pass more than 10 characters, we are going to get an error. And the error message is going to say the name is too big. So now after Swagger shows up, I'm going to try to post this. I'm going to try it out. Let me change the phone number to some integer value, some number value basically. And here for the name, I can give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And if I execute this time, see, it is saying that name is too big. And this is the message which is thrown by the model itself. So this is extremely simple implementation. If you look into the API itself, I'm not doing any validation as such. Given that I defined the model with all the validation attribute, it is automatically done by the framework. And only if the model is valid, it is going to go and execute rest of the code. So this is pretty cool feature which comes with the API and model validation. So now the next thing I wanted to cover is, let's say for this date, what we want to do is we want to have a way to validate the date in such a way that the date has to be greater than or equal to 2022. So for that, what we can do is we can say this particular user object derives from IValidatableObject. So we are going to implement this interface, and this interface comes with a single method called validate. It has a validation context here. So what we can do is, here all we have to do is, what is our goal? Our goal is, if the date is less than 2022, we want to throw an error essentially. So we can say if date, that's our property, dot year is less than 2022, then yield return. We are doing an yield return because it has to return a validation result IEnumerable. Hence we are doing an yield. So yield return new validation result. And here we can give our error message, which is date is incorrect. That's our message. And now if we run the application again, this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the date property, and I'm going to change it to 2021 and execute. And this time it should throw the error for invalid date. So here I'm going to go into post. I'm going to try it out. First, let me give some number to the phone number. And for the date here, I'm going to change it to 2021. Execute. And in the response, we can see we got a 400 response. Date is incorrect, as expected. So this is another way to create validation on model. It's just to implement a interface, IValidatableObject interface, and then inside the validate method, you can write anything you want for validation. And this gives you a very easy way to isolate the implementation of validation. Now, if you want to go one step ahead, and I personally don't like this code in the model itself because it looks a little bit ugly in my opinion. So I would personally prefer to create an attribute which is going to help us do that. So we can do that, and let's say we want to implement some logic for the membership. And let's say for the membership, we want to, but before we go to membership, one thing I did not show is the address. Address is required, but it will allow empty string. So let's show that also, because I don't think I covered that before. So let me run the application now. Okay, so now I'm going to go back here, try it out. Let's give some number. And here for address, if we put empty string, run, we still get 200, no problem. But if I'm going to get rid of this node altogether and try to execute, now I'm going to get an error that address field is required. So as you can see, we can make it required but empty. Okay, now back to the membership scenario. So let's say we have membership for the user, and we want to have a specific logic for the membership property itself. And in case of certain membership, we want to allow this particular API, this action on user post, we want to allow only for some membership and not for some. So to do that, what we can do is we can create another attribute, and I can name it as membership validation attribute. And the membership validation attributes class, let me first fix the namespace here. The membership validation attribute class is going to derive from validation attribute base class, which is also part of system.componentModel.data annotations. And this class, so for this class, what we have to do is we can override the method is valid, and we'll take the one which is the validation context. And then what we can do is we can say var user is equal to validation context dot object instance as user. The validation context, the object instance of the validation context should be containing the model that we are trying to validate, or the model on which we are going to use this attribute. And then here we can say if user dot membership dot toLore is equal to trial. So we are, if the membership of the user is trial, we don't want to allow this particular feature. So we are going to say then not allowed, and otherwise we are going to return validation result.success. If it's not a trial user, then just allow only for trial user, block this particular feature. And then we'll go here, and here we are going to add the attribute. So we'll say membership validation. So now I'm going to run this, and this time we are going to change the membership value to trial, and then we'll see that the validation is going to fail and it is going to throw an error. And this is how we can use a custom attribute to validate certain properties. And the other advantage of using custom attribute is that you can create a custom attribute for validation, and it can be used across multiple objects if you want to. So first, let me change the phone number to some number. And here, let's give it a trial and execute. And here you can see we got a 400 not allowed. So as you can see, it is extremely powerful and simple to use the validation framework of .NET 6. This is here I'm using .NET 6 and C# 10. And it is super simple just to define all your validation in the object itself through attribute. In worst case, you can use an IValidatableObject interface. You can implement that and provide an implementation for the validate method. And the other way, if we don't want to do it, is creating custom validation. And I personally prefer creating custom validation attribute. And finally, let's say what we want to do is we want to validate something like this, a string. What we can do is we can use the validation attribute here as well. Now here, let's say we want to validate the name, and we want to make sure it is only A to Z. The name is between A to Z. So we can use regular expression validation. So you can use regular expression. I have to add again the system.componentModel.data annotation namespace. And here for the expression, I'm going to provide a regular expression which will ensure that this is just a string between A to Z. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this expression A to Z, capital A to capital Z, and then plus dollar. That should be it. So now if I run this, and this time we are going to test the get. We have not tested the get yet. We were testing the post because that was expecting the user object as a parameter. So now after the Swagger loads up, we can go and test the get user. And here, if we provide test 1, 2, 3 and try to execute, it is failing. Now it is not intuitive from here because we're not seeing the error. So I'll show you how we can see that. So first let's prove that it is working as expected. Now I can copy this endpoint, open up a new tab and paste it here. And here I can give user 1, 2, 3. If I give that user 1, 2, 3, you can see we're getting a 400 error, and it says the field name must be regular expression this. Now we can change this error message also, but for the time being, this is how we can write regular expression validation on a string parameter into a get method. So, and here, if we want to change the error message, we can always give the error message is equal to, and we can say name is incorrect. Let's say that's our message. And we can try it out. And now instead of showing the regular expression in the error message, it is going to show the error message that we have provided in the attribute. So that way we can control the messaging as well. So once it loads up, I can go back and I can try it out. And I can say test here. And then let me copy this again. and I can try it out here, and I can say test 1 2 3, and you can see here this time the error message is as we expected, name is incorrect. This is a very simple way of implementing model validation and input validation as part of web API, which is available with the .NET framework itself. It is also, this same model validation is also available for lower version of the framework, even in .NET framework 4. Star. But in web API with .NET 6, one advantage I see is that we don't have to write any expression here to validate. It is kind of already taken care of. Otherwise, you will have to use model state dot is valid property to find out if the model is valid or not and throw an exception. Now in this case, you don't have to do, it's automatically taken care of. So that's all I wanted to cover for today's video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you are new to my channel and if you think you are getting value out of my channel, please subscribe to my channel. And thanks so much for watching this video.